Speaking of movies, though, that are probably not going to be highly rated, we go into I guess this movie is somewhat well known. I don't know. From 2007, Naked Fair.
Well, I wouldn't say somewhat well known because I never heard of it.
Well, it's known by a few people. I mean, it has like over 2,000 ratings on IMDb, so seems like a lot.
Hmm.
Naked Fair from 2007, in which an exotic dancer comes to a small town. Then she gets sort of abducted by this guy who likes to hunt people. He's hunted animals before, but he finds more pleasure in hunting people. So he kidnaps exotic dancers and strips them naked and hunts them down. Hunts the Naked Fair. Yeah, so there's a little more to this. This is a police detective who doesn't really do anything besides try to be a good guy, but it doesn't really amount to much. I mean, and I know, it's competent. It's an okay movie. It's just, I don't think it's particularly noteworthy, and I really don't think much about it stands out. Unless the, I guess, nudity, which is, it's quite a bit of it here, unless that's really your type of thing. I mean, and there's a few decent actors, I guess, and worth noting, it does have Joe Mantegna in it, the same guy who's from Thin, and I think you know from The Simpsons.
Mm-hmm.
He's here, so that's sort of nice, but he also doesn't really do that much. So, and that's like an hour and 45 minutes. Like, I don't know if they needed to make the movie like that long with this type of plot, but I'll talk a little bit about some of this. But what were your thoughts on this?
It obviously it's a somewhat low budget movie, despite having, one or two somewhat recognizable names in it. But it does have quite a significant direct-to-video type feel to the movie, as a lot of movies did around this time. It started out somewhat okay. I feel like kind of somewhere over the halfway mark, whatever interest I had was just slowly dissipating. Probably after the point, maybe just after that snake scene. She's been kidnapped. She's out there running around, trying not to get killed, and somewhere just shortly after that snake scene, yeah, I was just getting taken out of it.
Yeah, it's pretty much more the same for a lot of the movie. In my opinion, the only mildly interesting part during her whole thing is when she runs into the father and two sons who were out there hunting. That was mildly interesting.
I will say, and I know technically this happened like maybe a week after, but at the beginning of the movie, we see that this woman comes to this new town. She's got this new job, and then she kind of realizes that the job's not exactly as she was expecting. I'm not sure what she was expecting, but shortly after, she makes it clear that she wants to go home. She doesn't want to be working at this job. Then they cut to her like dancing, and it looks like she's seriously into her job.
Oh, I have a feeling that if she wasn't into her job, she wouldn't really be working that long in the job. I have to admit, that whole thing just left a bad taste in my mouth. Women getting exploited and sort of... I mean, it's not like they're necessarily forced, but I mean, she had her driver's license taken away. Like, that's a problem. I mean, talk about this commie business.
Speaking of that guy that recruited her, or whatever you want to call him, I mean, you could tell he was a dick right from the start when he didn't even help carry the bags to the car.
Like, I've seen this movie once before, like many years ago, and I forgot quite a bit about this one, and I thought maybe there was a possibility he would be a okay guy, but the more we saw of him, the more diggish he became. Like, talk about I mean, he's probably one of the more despicable characters in the movie, and this is a movie that has more than a few of them in it.
Speaking of other terrible things, there's some pretty terrible digital effects in this movie. Not that there's a whole lot, so maybe, depending on who you are, this type of thing might not affect you as much. I mean, I first noticed, I think, when she gets abducted in the car, and she kicks the screen, the cracked door screen just looked terribly fake. And then shortly after, once we see she's naked in the wilderness, the snake scene, which happens fairly early on to her capture. The snake at first looked okay, and then the closer it got, the moment just before it kind of tried to attack, man, it looked really terrible. So I don't know if they partially used a real snake or not, because at the beginning it looked fine, but then it just looked terribly fake. I don't know, is that something you noticed?
I admit I didn't necessarily notice that, only because I guess I see so many horrible special effects that they just blend into one another after a time.
Keeping in mind, I did watch this in HD on a fairly big television, so back in 2007, I don't think big TVs were in most homes at that stage, so they didn't really think ahead with HD and all these other things. Or maybe they just didn't care. They're like, this is what we have to work with, and
that might be more likely.
Yeah, it probably is. They're like, well, we know it's shitty, but what are you gonna do?
I think another somewhat interesting thing about this movie, and it may not necessarily be surprising, but the movie has a pretty grimy, sort of down-to-earth, negative feeling to it. There's not all that much humor here or tongue-in-cheek stuff. I mean, there's a few like hippie-like characters who appear toward the end who are sort of funny, but aside from them, it's a pretty, I wouldn't necessarily say dry, but it feels sort of like what you would expect from a 70s movie. And I found that somewhat interesting. And it sort of makes sense with everything going on, like a woman being forced to work in this type of job and has nobody to go to, so the gritty feeling works, but I thought it was sort of an interesting choice.
With all that being said, I'd bang Rita. Especially after she straightened her hair.
I have to say, I think the most attractive woman in this movie is probably the wife of the sheriff. I think her name is Carly, or something like that. I didn't much care for her personality at times, but she was something else.
You're a Carly kind of guy. And I'm a Rita kind of guy.
That sounds like a good comparison. Speaking
of which, I had to look her up just to see what else she's been in. And, it's comforting to know that... she's only been in a few movies, but it's comforting to know that in another movie she played a character, this is what it says in her IMDb profile, strip club waitress.
So that's going to be the next movie we talk about.
It's nice to see that I can watch another movie where she's playing such a similar quality character.
Well, I guess you have a new favorite to go look for. I guess one thing I want to say is that the whole idea of like some guy hunting people, I mean, it's not like it's an original idea. Even if you've not seen it, I'm sure you've heard of The Most Dangerous Game, which is a 1932 movie, and I think based off a short story. And there's been other movies that have been pretty decent. I think I forget if this one's from his trailer, but it's called Turkey Shoot from '82, which has a very somewhat similar plot.
Yep.
Bunch of people hunting down victims. So this movie wasn't particularly original, and it didn't really do much that made it stand out. I guess the only thing they had is what they, advertised in the name, naked fail. So it's just nude women running away from a guy with a gun. And I just think the fact that the women are naked as opposed to not being naked is that much of a great selling point.
Well, it does have naked, and it does have fear, I guess.
Yeah, it's just a shame it doesn't have any originality. Yeah, so I'm just going to throw this one a below average rating of 6 out of 10, which is pretty similar to what I gave it when I first saw it many years back. I think it's a competently made movie. I think there are decent actors and actresses in this. And even to an extent, the ending is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. So, I mean, but it's not like a movie I can imagine myself watching again anytime soon. And even though it's not necessarily a bad movie, I just don't think there's that much here that is particularly appealing. So I think a 6 out of 10 seems fair.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 5, and half a point's that. Half a point from that is probably because of Rita, and you know, the only reason for me to watch this again is just to check her out again.
It seems like a quality reason.